I got a call from someone claiming to be me. Alright, so I never thought I'd be the type of person to post something like this on the internet. I read those creepy or no sleep threads late at night, scrolling until my eyes burn and always think, man, these people have wild imaginations. But what happened to me? It's not something I could have made up. It's not some dream or a sleep paralysis story I half remembered after waking up. This actually happened, and it shook me so deeply that writing it out feels like the only way I can even process it. So, yeah, let me start at the beginning. It was about 3 weeks ago, Tuesday night. I remember because I had just gotten back from work late, microwaved some sad leftover pasta, and crashed on the couch. Nothing out of the ordinary. My apartment was quiet, just the faint hum of my fridge and the soft whir of my ceiling fan. I must have dozed off at some point. Phone still in my hand, because the next thing I know, it's buzzing violently against my chest. At first, I thought it was my alarm, but when I blinked my eyes open, the clock on the wall said 12:47 a.m. Who the hell calls at 12:47 on a weekday? I squinted at the screen. Unknown number. Normally, I let it go to voicemail, but in my half-asleep state, I answered without thinking. Hello? I croaked, my voice rough. There was a pause. Static. Like the faint hiss you get when you put a seashell to your ear. And then, stop pretending. You know who I am. I froze. Because the voice on the other end, it sounded exactly like mine. Not similar, not a little bit like me. I mean, identical. I sat up straighter. Who is this? The voice chuckled, low and deliberate. You already know? You've always known. Now I was awake, adrenaline shooting through me. Look, if this is some kind of joke, it's not funny. No joke, the voice said, calm and eerie. You've been playing my part long enough. Don't you think it's time you stopped? That's when it hit me. The caller wasn't just mimicking me. They were me. Every inflection, every pause, even the nervous edge I get when I'm caught in a lie. It was like talking to a recording of myself that somehow responded. I tried to shake it off. All right, buddy. Good impression. You got me. Who put you up to this? Was it Nate? Us. Nate's my best friend from college. He's the type who would absolutely pay someone on Fiverr to prank call me at 1 a.m. just for laughs. The voice ignored my question. Do you remember when you were 6? When you fell off your bike outside grandma's house? How you cried until she called you spaghetti legs? My chest tightened. My throat went dry. Nobody knew about that. At least, nobody except me and my grandma. She'd been gone for years. I never told Nate. I never told anyone. Who the hell are you? I demanded, my voice shaking. The other me sighed, almost disappointed. I told you already, I'm you, the real one. Click, the line went dead. I sat there in the dark, staring at my phone screen like it might explain itself. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my teeth. I replayed the words in my head. Spaghetti legs. The way he'd said it, the exact tone Grandma used to tease me with. There was no way this was a coincidence. No way someone had just guessed that. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up pacing my living room, checking the locks twice, 3 times. I even grabbed the baseball bat I keep in the hall closet, just in case. The next morning, bleary-eyed and buzzing with nerves, I called Nate. Dude, I said before he could even say hello. If this was you, just admit it. I won't even be mad. Just tell me. What the hell are you talking about? Nate yawned. The call last night, the voice thing. You didn't set that up? There was a pause. Bro, I was knocked out by 11. You know I have work at 6. What call? I wanted to believe him. Nate's a lot of things, but he's not a liar. And his groggy confusion sounded real. For the next couple days, nothing happened. I started convincing myself I'd just hallucinated it in some weird dream state. Until Friday. I was getting ready for bed when my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I stared at it for a long second, stomach twisting. Then, against my better judgment, I answered. Hello? This time, the voice didn't waste time. You're not supposed to be here. I swallowed hard. Look, I don't know who you are or how you're doing this, but you stole my life. The voice interrupted, sharp now. You won't get to keep pretending it's yours. I didn't steal anything, I shouted. The voice lowered, menacing. Then why do you live in my apartment? Why do you wear my clothes? Why do you tell my stories to my friends? I froze. My eyes darted around my apartment. The worn couch, the stack of mail on the counter, the jacket draped over the chair. My apartment, I whispered, almost to myself. Yes, the voice hissed. Mine. Click. Again, the call cut off before I could respond. By now, I was spiraling. I tore through my call history, but the number always showed up as unknown. No caller ID, no digits, just blank. I called my service provider, but they said there was no record of the incoming calls, like they'd never happened. I tried blocking unknown numbers altogether. 2 nights later, my phone rang again at 3:14 a.m., and somehow it got through. When I answered, the voice laughed. My laugh. You can't block me. You can't hide from me. I am you. My skin crawled. My breath came shallow and fast. I hung up. 10 seconds later, the phone rang again. This time, I let it go to voicemail. When I checked the message, it was just breathing at first. Heavy, ragged. Then a whisper. Spaghetti legs. I nearly threw my phone across the room. I started asking around carefully, like I was trying not to sound insane. At work, I casually mentioned to a coworker if anyone ever got prank calls that felt too real. They just looked at me weird. I asked Nate again if he was sure he wasn't screwing with me. He swore on his life he wasn't. I even Googled phone call from yourself. which, surprise surprise, only led me to a rabbit hole of creepypasta and urban legends. Doppelgangers, glitches in the Matrix, you name it. But here's the thing, none of those stories felt as real as what I was going through. And then, the worst part, the detail that tipped me over from maybe I'm just stressed and losing it into holy shit, this is real and dangerous. It was last Sunday. I was cleaning up the kitchen, phone charging on the counter when it started buzzing again. This time, it didn't say unknown number. It showed my number. My exact number. Incoming call, me. I'll stop here for now, because my hands are literally shaking as I type this. But I swear on everything I have, I picked up that call and I heard my own voice say, finally, ready to give my life back? If you thought the first call was creepy, buckle up. Because after that night, my life stopped being a life and started being a catalog of tiny, impossible intrusions. Little things that didn't make sense on their own, but piled up until the whole thing collapsed into a single, horrible conclusion. Someone was living my life alongside me. Someone who sounded like me, looked like me, and worse, was convincing other people that he was the real one. I'm going to try to write this as cleanly as I can. When I read it back, it still feels like a fever dream, but I promise, everything I say here happened. I wrote these words with the same hands that held the phone, opened the emails, and stared at the footage. If you think I'm embellishing for drama, fine, but know that I wish I were. Sleep became this rare commodity I could not afford. At first, it was the calls. Sometimes one, sometimes a few. Always late, always with that same voice that made my stomach turn. But even when the phone didn't ring, sleep wouldn't come. My brain replayed conversations, trying to find a pattern, trying to find a mistake in my logic I could exploit. That's what people do, right? We overthink when we're scared. We look for the lever to pull that will make everything right again. Only there wasn't a lever. Every morning I woke up exhausted and suspicious. I'd lie there in the pale light seeping through my blinds and scroll my email. Habit more than necessity, because that's what I always did. Coffee first, email second. That was my routine. But then emails started behaving like someone else had read them already. Not in the vague, marked as read way. This was specific. A message would come in from my manager, "Can you handle the Henderson file?" And I blinked because I swear I received and opened it already. My phone would show it as unread. Or worse, I'd click to open something and the app would tell me I'd already opened it, with timestamps that placed my open at times when I'd been asleep or at the grocery store or on the subway. At first I chalked it up to a syncing issue, a glitch. Technology does weird crap sometimes. But then I began to notice other patterns. My email drafts folder had entries I didn't remember writing. Short notes, quick sentences, call mom about the leak, ask Nate about Thursday, the kind of half-formed reminders I leave myself. Some of them were typed in my exact cadence, the elliptical pauses I use, the way I start sentences and then delete half of them. Whoever was typing in my account knew me too well. I changed passwords. I set up two-factor authentication. I called tech support. They ran scans, told me everything looked fine, that there was no unauthorized access, which made sense. Apparently no one had logged in as me, but messages were still being read. You know that feeling when someone knows the punchline to a joke you haven't told yet? It's like that, but turned up to 11. A week after the first call, I got an alert from my bank app. New login from a new device. A little notification, logged in from, get this, Philadelphia. I live in the city. I've never logged in from Philadelphia. My chest tightened. I clicked the alert and the app showed a map, dot against the skyline, and a timestamp for 3:17 a.m. that same day. I called the bank. They traced the login to an IP, but, surprise, nothing concrete they could share. "We'll put a freeze," the woman on the other end said. "We'll send you a new card. Please monitor your account." I appreciated the corporate politeness. I told the bank I needed more than that. I asked for the login device details. They said privacy laws prevented them from releasing that. A friendly, helpless shrug through a phone line. Then I logged into my account and saw withdrawals flagged for cash advances from an ATM 3 towns over while I was home in my apartment, asleep, according to my building's CCTV that I later asked to see. My account balance had spikes, then immediate transfers to an unknown account that my bank refused to trace publicly. It felt like watching myself being drained in slow motion. Work became a minefield. I'm not someone who gets in trouble often. I do my job and keep my head down. But that changed quickly. On a Tuesday afternoon, my manager, Paul, cornered me by the coffee station like he'd done 100 times before, only this time his face had that peculiar mix of pity and annoyance people use when they think someone's lying. "You okay, man?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Why?" "We got a complaint," he said. "From HR, someone said you left the client meeting early this morning, that you were acting weird, and that you told them you would handle the Henderson file. But you were never at the office, James. Your desk was empty. Security logs show you never swiped in, and yet someone signed your name to the attendance sheet." My mouth went dry. I told him I'd been homesick, that I'd called in, that I'd been on my couch. He frowned. "The security footage shows you walking into the lobby at 8:07. We can pull it." Pull it. I spent the rest of the day at work with this pressure under my ribs. I kept thinking, maybe someone is screwing with me. Maybe it's an elaborate prank. But it was too cohesive to be a prank. It was surgical, precise, like someone was slowly but methodically taking a life they believed belonged to them and replacing it. piece by piece. One Saturday, I went to this little corner grocery store near the subway because I needed milk, and for some reason, normal life felt like it hadn't been touched. I'd been careful lately, avoiding social media, keeping my head down. Yet when I walked in, the clerk looked at me with a weird expression, like recognition mixed with the kind of suspicion people use to confirm a face they think they saw. "Didn't I just see you leave the store?" He blurted out, eyes flicking to the doorway. "I'd literally just walked in." "No, I just got here," I said, my voice higher than I wanted. He rubbed his head. "Must be my eyes. You look just like that guy who—" He stopped. The way he trailed off made every hair on my arm stand up. Later that evening, I was walking down a busy street and a woman tapped my shoulder and said, "Hey, weren't you in line at Joe's around 11? I told her I hadn't been. She narrowed her eyes. "I could have sworn you were. You were with a man in a blue jacket." I had no idea who that man was. No idea where I was at 11 last night. I knew exactly where I'd been, but her certainty, her memory, pushed at me like a hand probing a bruise. The city felt like it had two versions of me moving through it, sometimes overlapping, sometimes sliding past each other like two tectonic plates on a slow, dangerous collision course. And then the recording started. At first it was voicemail, short snippets left on my phone after I ignored calls, static, breathing, a half-laughed, spaghetti legs. Then came the audio files, small compressed clips that I found in a folder I didn't create. The first one was a minute long, me talking, but about things I had never said. In the clip, my voice, my exact voice, was calm and slow, detailing a sequence of events I had no memory of. I met him at the bakery, gave him the keys, told him not to touch the box, then left, as if I were recounting an ordinary day. I played it over and over, writing down the words like I could catch a hint of where it had been recorded. The timestamps were stripped, metadata was wiped clean. It was forensic level thoroughness. Someone was making sure there was no breadcrumb trail, or if there was, they were the only one clicking them up. I took one of those files to Nate. He's stubborn and useful in moments like this. He listened with his head cocked, then rewound and said, "That's you, but I don't like the cadence. It's off. Like someone took the pieces of you and reassembled them." He's good with audio. He said he could run it through his software, look for edits, find splice marks. He said things I wanted to hear. He promised to look into it. 3 days later, Nate didn't answer his phone. He'd been at least semi-constant since we were kids. I left a string of messages, each more anxious than the last. No response. I walked to his apartment and found his door ajar. Inside, half-packed boxes, a bowl of cereal. No sign of him. His roommate told me Nate had gone to run an errand and never came back. He hadn't taken his car. He hadn't taken his wallet. He just vanished. The police took the missing person report and were polite. They asked the usual questions. Enemies? Debts? Bad breakup? But Nate was a simple guy. He didn't have enemies. There wasn't a reason. I kept thinking about the audio file I'd given him. The way his cursor kept jumping to a specific waveform. The last thing he said to me in a voicemail, 2 days before his disappearance, was, "You need to stop trying to talk to it. Once it knows you're looking, it starts moving faster." I saved that message like a relic, replaying his wise and scared voice. It sounded like a warning. I stopped leaving my apartment when it got dark. I started taking different routes to work. I changed my passwords again. I started sleeping with the lights on, like some child hoping the sun would push the monsters away. It didn't help. At work, things escalated beyond weird. I'd be at my desk and someone would come in saying, "Hey, I just ran into James at the deli. He said to tell you he'd be late." I'd check my messages and find nothing. Or a calendar invite would appear on my schedule that I hadn't created. Client call, W/Henderson 8 a.m. It would appear with my email automatically accepting. I checked the access logs for that. It showed a machine in a different part of the city, flagged with my user token. Every digital hand that touched my life left no fingerprint that a corporation could present. It was as if the intruder knew how to exist under the radar, using my credentials like a skeleton key. I joked once to my manager, "Do you think I could actually have a twin?" He laughed, the laugh that says, "That's not funny." He told me it might be stress. "Look, why don't you take a few days off? Clear your head, James." But when I asked HR for the day off, the request came back denied because you had already been marked as present, which made no sense. I hadn't been present. My card hadn't been swiped, but someone had signed the sheet. There were other small humiliations too, like when my landlord knocked on my door and asked why I hadn't informed him about the supposed plumber who came through last Thursday. "You didn't see him?" the landlord asked with a suspicious brow. "You told me you handled it." I had not. I had no memory of a plumber. I'd asked the landlord to show me the receipt. He pulled up a photo on his phone showing my face in my kitchen, handing cash to a man in a reflective vest. In the photo, I was smiling. I was wearing the gray hoodie I own, but I never handed cash to anyone. I'd left my cash envelopes in my sock drawer. After that photo, the hole in my world got bigger. It was one thing for strangers to say they'd seen me when I hadn't been somewhere. It was another entirely to have visual proof of a life I didn't remember living. I started to think that maybe, just maybe, I had been sleepwalking. Maybe I had some dissociative episode. But then I'd remember the times I was with friends and they'd look at me like I'd just told a different story. "You said you were out with me last night," Nate had texted once. before he disappeared. Why are you telling everyone else you were at home? I had no idea what he was talking about. I told the same friends two different things depending on who I spoke to, because one version of me apparently had a different memory than the other version. It's a small, awful thing to realize that people you trust are starting to doubt you. The moment you see their faces harden into suspicion, something breaks inside your chest. You begin to feel like a ghost haunting your own life, present but unseen, heard but not believed. One day, I found a package on my doorstep, no return address. It was light but wrapped in plain brown paper. Inside was a small voice recorder. The little LED flashed as soon as I picked it up. On it, a single file. I almost didn't press play, but curiosity and that odd, desperate human need to understand defeat you. I hit play. It was me, speaking to someone. I could hear background noise, like a train, faint, and the clang of cutlery. The voice was calm. The words were mundane but specific. I told you to keep it sealed. If they found out, we'd lose everything. I took care of the lease. I told them I'd be handling the papers from now on. My hands shook so badly I had to set the recorder on the table. I played it again. The voice said things I'd never said, about a lease transfer, about a box in storage, about a key hidden beneath a loose tile on the balcony. I went to the balcony and pried up the tile. There, wrapped in plastic, was a key, my apartment key, numbered, stamped, not my spare. A second set, but with someone else's tiny alterations, an extra nick on the metal, a small scratch near the teeth. I started checking places I never thought to look. Drawers I'd stashed things in, shoe boxes. There were small items I had no recollection of, receipts for dinner with people I didn't know, photographs I didn't remember taking. One photo was my face in a crowd, smiling at a camera I didn't recognize. The metadata in the file, the date, placed it 3 weeks back, on the night I thought I'd been home. The worst part is how calm the other me sounded in those recordings. Not frantic, not defensive, just matter of fact. I've set everything right, he said in one clip. This will be cleaner if we stop pretending. When you start to accept two versions of your own memory, reality thins. You stop trusting your sense of time. You become a cartographer of your own life, tracing lines where you think they are and seeing another map superimposed over it. The maps never matched. The other map had landmarks I'd never visited but knew too much about. The little brown house on Oak Street where someone kept a box in the attic. The bench by the river where someone, my double, had once met a woman with red hair. These were details that made no sense until later. People around me began to act like they knew him. My boss introduced me in a meeting and a woman from another team came up after and said, "Great to finally meet you. I heard from James last week about the product specs." My mouth went dry. I told her maybe she had the wrong person. She looked at me like I was being difficult. When I asked to review the security footage, my company said they would, but requested a day's notice. When I finally watched the footage, my heart lodged in my throat. At 8:07 a.m. on Tuesday, the lobby camera caught a man, me, swiping his badge, walking through the lobby, greeting the security guard. He looked tired. He was wearing my gray hoodie. He carried a coffee cup. He had the same slouch I have when I'm concentrating. I paused the frame and zoomed in until his face filled the screen. The angle was unflattering, but the nose, the line of the jaw, the thin scar near the left eyebrow I got when I was 12, there it was. I knew that scar like I knew the lines on my palm. My palms went cold. If that was me, then where had I been? And if that wasn't me, then who the hell had that right to walk into my life and mimic me so perfectly? I started sleeping in the living room with the curtains open. Stupid, I know. The idea was I could see anyone approaching. I felt safer if the world was in sight. At 2:13 in the morning, I was jolted awake by the sound of someone moving outside. Small, careful steps on the fire escape. I sat up and my heart began to pound so hard I forgot to breathe. My phone vibrated. Incoming call. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone into the street, but I answered. My voice on the line said calmly as if we were two office colleagues making small talk. "You're awake. Who are you?" I asked. "You know me," he said. "I'm the one who gets to keep things tidy. You were sloppy, James. Messy. That's why you lose them." His voice had that same patient menace, like someone explaining a rule to a child. "You should be grateful I fixed it." I swung the curtains open and peered down the fire escape. At the landing, framed by the faint halo of the streetlight, stood a figure. Hood up. Shadow hiding the face. For a split second, I thought my brain would invent him away. He climbed up like someone who had keys and business in the building. Each footfall was slow, deliberate. He moved along the metal path toward my window. My muscles coiled. When he reached the landing under my window, he stopped and turned his head slightly, just enough that the streetlight hit his face, and for a second the world narrowed into a single point. He looked exactly like me. I mean that literally. Same jawline, same nose, same scar, the same slight asymmetry in his left eyebrow that I've always hated in photographs. Even his posture matched me, the little tilt to the right I use whenever I stand for a long time. There was no shadow of doubt in that moment. For the first time since all this started, the abstract idea of an imposter snapped into concrete, horrific focus. He raised a finger to his lips and mouthed, "No, not mouthed," formed cleanly, the words, "shh." Then he tapped the window twice, an invitation, a taunt, and disappeared down the fire escape into the night. I remember sitting on the floor long after he left, the curtains hanging slack where I'd forgotten to draw them closed. My hands trembled. I felt like I'd been given the cruelest of proofs. Not only had someone been living my life in my absence, but that person had my face. He could walk into my building, into my life, and leave without a trace. He could stand under my window and tell me, silently, that he owned whatever we both shared. I wish I could tell you at that point I did something brave. I didn't. I slept fitfully until morning, and then, with all the brittle courage of someone who's already been through too much, I started making a list. Names to call, people to show the footage to, places to check, evidence to collect. I kept that list like a life preserver. I visited the photo lab where the landlord had gotten the picture of me handing cash to the plumber. The clerk looked at me with a kind of tired sympathy. "We develop what we get," she said. The image had been printed in a rush, the ink slightly smeared, showing me smiling into a camera I didn't recognize. I asked for the original file. She typed something into her terminal and handed me a thumb drive. The file metadata, however, showed nothing. The timestamps were stripped. Some things are more careful than you'd think. At this point, the polite skepticism people offered no longer helped. Friendliness had an edge to it now, like a closed door. When I told my sister about the phone calls, because you have to tell someone, I remember the way her voice steadied and turned to a clinical calm. "Maybe you should see a doctor," she said. "Stress can do crazy things." She suggested therapy, sleep studies. She told me to take care of myself. But each suggestion felt like the world trying to tidy up the leftover pieces and say, there, it's fine. I couldn't accept that, because tangibility kept appearing. Surveillance clips, a key under a tile, a voice recorder, photos. That was not something your brain could easily explain away. Toward the end of the chapter of my life that I called The Imposter, something else happened that finally stopped me in my tracks. I went out to the mailbox to get the utility bill and noticed a man leaning against a lamppost across the street. He wore a coat like mine, hands in his pockets, head down. As I walked back to my building, our eyes met. He didn't look away. Not like someone who'd recognize me by accident. He looked at me like he was cataloging me. He lifted a hand in a gentle, almost gentlemanly wave, something like an acknowledgement or maybe a claim. I stopped dead. He started walking toward me in a casual way, as if our meeting were planned and inevitable. My brain tried to supply reasons. Maybe he was a neighbor. Maybe he thought I was someone else. He crossed the street and smiled. The smile was the same as mine in old photos, the little closed-lip smile I give when I'm trying not to laugh. "Hi," he said. His voice was softer in person, but still unquestionably mine. "You're looking tired." I didn't know what to say. He tilted his head. "You are trying to find me, aren't you?" he asked, almost conversationally. "How do you know that?" I said, and the words cracked on the last syllable. "You leave breadcrumbs," he said. "Small things, places you'd hide from yourself." The tile was clever, by the way. The key was a neat trick. I reached for my phone as if it were a weapon. He put up a hand. "Relax, I'm not here to hurt you, not yet." His tone was like someone explaining a schedule. "But you should stop running. It's messy. Messy people get noticed." "Get out of here," I said, voice thin. He smiled, that same small smile, then turned and walked away. I watched him leave as if I were watching my own life pass by and fast forward. He didn't look back. That lack of a backward glance felt like an erasure. That night, I sat by the window, with the curtains pulled back and the lights on. I didn't sleep. I didn't want to close my eyes and conjure what might happen if I did. At 2:13 a.m., there were soft footsteps on the fire escape again. I watched as a shadow approached. For a split second, the streetlight caught his face. He was me. He raised his hand, pressed it barely against the window. Not to tap or to knock, but to put his palm where mine sometimes rests when I'm thinking. It was an intimate, bizarre touch, and I felt like a voyeur to some private ritual. He mouthed the word. No sound, just the shape of the syllables. Soon, then he was gone. I watched his silhouette blend into the night until the building across the street swallowed him. I closed the curtains, my hands shaking, and sat on the couch. I realized I was not the protagonist of my own life anymore. I was a character in someone else's script. I'm writing this with my hands still a little unsteady because the memory of that night, of those nights, has a weight to it that I can't shake. This chapter is where everything I'd been able to shrug off broke, where obsession replaced curiosity and desperation replaced confidence, where I stopped hoping for a prank and started believing I'd been written out of my own life. If you've read the first two chapters, you know the setup. The calls, the voice that sounded exactly like mine, the little intrusions that piled up until they made a cliff. Chapter 3 is the fall. It's the part where I stopped being capable of normal life because I was too busy trying to prove I existed. The first thing I did after deciding that passive waiting wasn't an option was set up cameras. Not in a creepy spy movie way. I'd already crossed a line where common sense felt optional, but in a very technical, very legal, and very unmistakable way. I bought cameras that could stream to my laptop, cameras that wrote to the cloud, cameras that had infrared for night vision. I placed one in the living room, pointing at the front door, one on the balcony, and a small, inconspicuous one above the kitchen sink. I hid a button camera in the houseplant and another in the smoke detector. Ridiculous as that sounds. If someone was using my apartment as a stage for their life, I wanted footage. I wanted timestamps. I wanted proof that could not be argued away. I remember the first night I left the cameras rolling. I felt like a ridiculous paranoid person and a competent investigator at the same time. I told myself I was doing everything reasonable. I was documenting anomalies so I could show them to the police, to HR, to anyone who would listen and not look at me like I'd sprouted horns. I convinced myself that once I had footage, things would snap back into place. So, they didn't. At first, the footage was the sort of thing you expect. My midnight trips to the fridge, the neighbor's fuzzy cat entering my balcony, the occasional drunk tenant staggering past in the hall. But then, on the third morning, the front door camera captured something that made my stomach drop like someone had just punched it out of my chest. Timestamp 2:03 a.m. Door opens. A silhouette steps in. Hoodie up, head down, moves like someone who's comfortable in the space, like someone who has keys and knows where the light switch is. He walks past the camera's field and into the living room. The angle changes as he moves. The image clears. The light hits his face. It was me on the screen. Not could have been me. Not a distant cousin. Me. The exact tilt. The scar above the eyebrow. The way my right shoulder slumps when I walk. He moved through my apartment with the same unconsciousness I have when I come home after a long day. Dropping his bag, pulling his shoes off by the door. Little habit-driven things you don't notice until someone else does them in your home. I paused the footage because replaying it in real time felt like letting someone else steal more of my breath. I zoomed. I enhanced. The pixels couldn't lie. He opened the refrigerator and took out the Greek yogurt brand I buy on Thursdays. He rifled through the mail on the counter and selected a letter with my name. He sat at my kitchen table and chewed slowly, methodically, exactly the way I chew when I'm thinking. He took out a small notebook from his jacket and scribbled something I couldn't read at first. I watched that clip over and over until the sun came up and the world outside my window bled into gray. By the time the footage had looped a dozen times, I felt like someone had poured cold water down my spine and left the glass there. I took the footage to the police. I walked in and shoved a thumb drive at the desk, blurted out the story like an accusation, and waited for the kind of response you see on television. The officer took it, watched, and then gave me that look people give when they doubt you but don't want to say it out loud. "We can open an investigation," he said, "but there's limited evidence of wrongdoing. You have the right to change your locks, to request security footage from your building, to seek a protective order if you feel threatened." You see how that sounds? It's all official sounding verbs that in practice mean we'll write it down, we'll be sympathetic, don't do anything stupid, which is what I wanted to hear, but also the opposite of what I needed. I needed someone to see the face on that screen and react the way you would if a stranger told you someone had stolen their identity. I wanted them to pick up the phone and call in backup. They didn't. So I kept watching. I installed better software. I learned enough about bitrate and compression and frame loss to sound like I knew what I was doing when I argued with technicians. I threaded together timestamps from my apartment camera with the access logs my building's security reluctantly shared. The nights the calls came were the nights the other me was there, always between 1:30 and 3:30 a.m., like clockwork. If I was out of the apartment for some reason, at a friend's place, at work late, he showed up and did things I had no recollection of. He retrieved a box from under my bed. He opened a second envelope of cash hidden in my sock drawer. He used my laptop and logged in with my cached credentials. I tried to trace the calls. I became intimate with every feature of my phone and carrier. I read forums, lurked on tech subreddits, and bought SIM cards and signal tracking apps. For every trick I thought I had, there was a countermeasure. The calls came with spoofed metadata, burner routing, and jitter that made the usual trace methods useless. But there was one maddening constant. Every time I tried to trace the origin, the log collapsed like a house of cards towards a single point, my own phone. The trace route would circle around, pinging different nodes, bouncing through relay servers, and then the last hop would resolve to my number. It's unbelievable until you see it on paper. Each trace came back with the same result: caller origin plus my number. It was like the universe had decided to choose me as a joke and dialed my line as the punchline. Well, at some point in the middle of this, I did something that, in hindsight, was both inevitable and foolhardy. I confided in someone I trusted. Nate was missing. Still missing. I needed help. So I called a guy I hadn't seen since high school, Luis. Luis was a quiet one, a mid-level systems admin who liked his beer and his dusty box of drumsticks. I'd reconnected with him on social media months earlier, and when I messaged him in the small hours a half-coherent plea about identity theft, he called back almost immediately. When I told Luis everything, he didn't laugh. He didn't give me the "maybe you need help" line. He asked questions, he asked for the footage, he asked for the audio files, and when I sent them, he downloaded them like a diver taking a breath before jumping. "This is technical work," he told me. "We'll try to capture packets, look for signatures. If something is spoofing your number, it's leaving traces somewhere." He came over the next night. He was methodical, setting up his laptop, his little router scraper, his analyzers. He moved through my living room like someone opening a puzzle box, eyes sharp, hands quick. For a few hours, we worked in silence, except for the hum of the machines and his occasional muttered commentary. He was the kind of person who found calm in chaos. I confided in him because I believed his competence would be my anchor. At about 2:18 a.m., as he was running a packet capture, the phone started ringing. We both tensed. Luis didn't flinch. He knew from the logs he'd been parsing these calls were different. He motioned for me to pick up the receiver, which I did, hands trembling. On the line, my voice said, as if greeting an old neighbor, "Hello." The cap on the packet capture froze at a single line of raw data. Luis's face went pale. He zoomed in and out, his fingers flying over keys like he was playing some frantic, impossible piano. Then he leaned back and said, with the kind of sharp, breathless calm I hadn't heard from him before, "We can do this. There's something in the packet. It's not a call, it's a stream. Someone's streaming your voice, your identity, but the stream's endpoint resolves back to your device. That's not normal. It's not even physically possible in a clean way. Someone is braiding your traffic with your own." "What does that mean?" I asked, and I knew I didn't want the answer. "It means either someone has intimate control of your network stack, or..." He stopped mid-sentence like he'd hit a wall. Before he could finish, there was a noise at the door. The building's hallway light clicked on, and someone's footsteps padded up the stairwell. Luis went pale. "Stay here," he said quietly, then stood, grabbed his jacket, and moved to the door. Oh, he opened it a crack. Then he didn't come back. His shoes were gone from the threshold. There was a smear of something small and dark on the mat. His jacket was missing. The laptop and all our equipment was gone from the table. There were no signs of forced entry other than the ajar deadbolt. It was as though whoever had taken him had simply walked in and walked back out. I staggered to the window and looked down. The street below was empty. No car, no van, no sign. I called him. No answer. I called his phone. Straight to voicemail. I called his apartment. Nobody answered. I reported him missing to the police with a voice that felt like a stranger's. They took the basic information and said they'd send a patrol by, but their tone had not changed. I could hear their skepticism like background noise. Did he leave voluntarily? Any debts? Any enemies? The same machine questions. Luis was a man who liked drums and curry and quiet bars. He did not have enemies. He certainly did not have reasons to disappear in the middle of the night. I spent 2 sleepless days combing through his last messages. In his last text to me, he'd written, "Don't look directly at it. If it sees you looking, it moves." It was a horrifying, cryptic line that felt like a map with most of the landmarks removed. He'd meant it as a warning. I hadn't understood it until he was gone. Meanwhile, the rest of my life was folding inwards. Work issues multiplied like mold. My boss sent emails that stung with the quiet, efficient anger of corporate disappointment. "James, we need to discuss your attendance." Meetings I had no recollection of attending were referenced in follow-ups. One Friday afternoon, I was pulled into a conference room and told, "Someone reported you made inappropriate comments to a client over lunch." I sat there stunned, my mouth thick, someone else's words echoing in a version of my head that refused to accept them. I tried to explain I hadn't been at that lunch. The security logs, the calendar entries, the email acceptances, all showed otherwise. My protest felt like a parlor trick. People were either convinced by the evidence against me or choosing to be. When your job starts to look at you like you're unreliable, doors shut. I applied for an internal transfer and the HR rep replied that my profile had an asterisk now. The asterisk read like a scarlet letter, "Under review." I could feel the slow drip of a career being siphoned off into some other person's bank. The landlord, bless him, was practical. He knocked on my door one morning with a ledger in hand and a frown I'd never seen on his face. "James," he said, voice like gravel, "I don't know what's happening with you, but somebody paid this month's rent in cash last week. I've got the receipt. You were here when he gave it to me." He tapped the dated entry. "You told me you were handling the repairs and the lease stuff, and you said, 'Don't worry, I'll manage the tenant issues for the next month.'" I told him I had never talked to him about that. He shrugged as though diplomacy was the default and said, "Well, the money's in the ledger. Everything's fine. If you need to update anything, let me know." Everything's fine. That phrase felt like a taunt. Someone else was taking the shape of my life and leaving me to watch it'll be smoothed over. When I got home one night, I remember because it was raining hard and the city smelled like wet asphalt. I swiped my building key and my door opened. The apartment smelled faintly of cigarettes and strong coffee, like the living room had hosted someone and then been cleared. On the table, beneath a coaster, was a scrap of paper. Handwriting in block letters. My handwriting, but steadier. "Stop fighting. This'll be easier if you accept it." Underneath, in smaller script, like an afterthought, "You're the glitch. I'm the fix." I crumpled the paper and it felt like folding up the last map to a desert I'd been wandering. The paper didn't help. It didn't counsel. It didn't explain. It was simply another item in a list of things that belonged to me and were used to tell me I had no say. At some point in this descent, I began to laugh at ridiculous times. I'd be on a call and suddenly burst into a dry, hysterical laugh that my coworkers remarked upon and texted me about, and I'd smile apologetically, the way you do when your mouth betrays the storm inside. I know that sounds melodramatic, but when your life is being rearranged to fit someone else, someone who can replicate your voice, your face, your handwriting, the smallest act of normalcy becomes an achievement. And then came the night. The night I could not unsee when I finally broke in a new, irrevocable way. I had finally convinced myself to request a full set of footage from my building's hallway cameras for a 3-week period. It cost me, there was a fee of course, but I need evidence, I told myself. I sat in front of my laptop and imported the files, stitching them together into a timeline. I cross-referenced each entry with my own memory log, my receipts, my grocery app check-ins. It was painstaking work, an attempt to reconstruct meaning from a place that was trying to erase me. At 1:42 a.m. on a Thursday 2 weeks prior, the camera at the building entrance captured this. A man, me, walked in, badge swipe, a nod to the guard, and in he went. The footage was grainy but undeniable. He carried a small duffel, the same one I used for weekend trips. He paused at the elevator and then stepped into it. The elevator doors closed. But then, the timestamp blurred. Frames dropped. There was a 5-minute gap. And when the footage resumed, the elevator doors opened and he walked out with a cigarette in his mouth, lighter in hand. He flicked the lighter and tossed it into the planter. He walked down the corridor and opened my apartment door. He walked in. Except I hadn't been home that night. I had been at my sister's, falling asleep on her couch. Her calls, the timestamp message threads, the receipts, everything said I'd been elsewhere. I watched the footage and felt the room tilt. I pressed the play button again and then I watched as the man, me, crossed the living room, sat at the kitchen table and took a duffel out of which he pulled a small battered box. He opened it carefully and took out a handful of photographs, a folded, old receipt, date, and something else wrapped in wax paper. He unwrapped it and for a moment I thought it was food. Then he took a pen from his hoodie and wrote something on the back of one of the photos. He didn't look at the camera. He didn't turn on the light. He simply did the things I would do when I was alone and content. He left the box open, placed the photographs in a neat pile, and left. The front door clicked shut. I stared at the screen until the footage looped back on itself and my eyes were burning. The man on the screen, me, had walked into my apartment during a time I had incontrovertible proof I was elsewhere. I had my sister's sofa indent, her cat's fur on my jacket, a text thread, timestamp that night at 11:03 p.m. telling me to come to bed. And yet, there I was on the footage, entering my apartment, making small, intimate gestures I could not remember. My chest felt hollow and I vomited into the sink like a person who'd been strangled by reality. The footage didn't explain motives. It didn't explain who or why, but it was a fact, a hard, bright fact. Someone identical to me was living my life sometimes, and my life was, apparently, being politely transferred. On that screen, the man, me, paused by the living room window. He stood for a long time as if listening for something. There was a tap at the glass. He looked up, and for the first time during the whole descent, he smiled the same smile I see when I find a joke in a bad situation. He put one hand flat against the glass, and for a second, the camera caught him facing the dark outside. The city spread behind him like something indifferent, and then he turned and left, as ordinary as you please. That image, me, touching the window like it meant something, stayed with me. It was the last thread holding me to any idea of self. When the man on the screen looked like me and moved like me and left as if he belonged, something inside me surrendered. The paranoia had already been eating at me for weeks. The calls, the emails, the CCTV footage of myself walking into my own apartment when I wasn't even there. All of it had left me cracked down the middle, but there was still this small part of me holding on, whispering, maybe it's a glitch. Maybe there's a reasonable explanation. That voice died the moment I saw him, my double. It happened on a Tuesday evening, which makes it worse because Tuesday should be the most boring day of the week. Nothing ever happens on a Tuesday. I just left work early because apparently I had already been there in the morning and pissed off my boss, and I was walking down my block, head low, headphones in, but no music playing. I'd gotten used to the routine of checking shadows, reflections in windows, scanning faces on the street. That's when I froze. At the far end of the block, leaned casually against the lamppost right outside my building, was me. Same jacket, same jeans, same face, same hair that never sits right. He wasn't on his phone, wasn't distracted. He was waiting for me. I swear my stomach dropped into my shoes. My first instinct was flight, but my legs locked up. It felt like some animal part of my brain recognized the predator in front of me, even though logically it was just me. He pushed off the lamppost, walked toward me with this easy, confident stride, no hesitation, no fear. And I'll never forget his expression. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't angry. It was worse. It was calm, like he'd been expecting this. When he stopped in front of me, maybe a foot away, I finally found my voice. "What the hell are you?" I managed. His mouth twitched like he almost smiled. "I'm you, the real you, the one who's supposed to be here." "No? No, you're not?" "Yes," he said softly, like he was explaining something to a child. "I've been fixing your mistakes, cleaning up. People are already starting to see the difference." I wanted to hit him, scream, anything. But the truth is, hearing my own voice, my exact cadence coming out of his mouth paralyzed me. It was like listening to a recording of myself I didn't remember making. He leaned closer. "You've made a mess of this life. I'm just correcting it." And then he brushed past me like I wasn't even there and walked into my building with my keys. I didn't follow right away. My body felt like stone. By the time I forced myself inside, the lobby was empty. When I reached my door, the lock didn't budge. My key, my only damn apartment key, no longer worked. I jiggled it, cursed, slammed my fist against the wood. Then I heard movement inside, my own voice, muffled through the door, laughing. That's when it hit me. He wasn't lying. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was already replacing me. The next few days unraveled faster than I can even explain. At work, my badge stopped scanning. Security told me my employment had been terminated. When I demanded to see my boss, the secretary gave me a look like I was insane and said, "We already spoke to you about this yesterday." My bank account frozen. I called customer service, and after 30 minutes of hold music, they said they couldn't verify my identity because I had already changed the recovery information in person. My phone stopped working. Service just cut. When I went to the carrier store, the clerk told me my account had been closed that morning. Even my landlord wouldn't answer my calls. When I finally cornered him outside the building, he shook his head and said, "Look, I don't know what scam you're trying to pull, but you already paid this month. In cash." Paid in cash. The exact same thing that had happened before with the rent, except now there was no denying it. He was living in my apartment, paying my bills, going to my job, using my name, and everyone accepted him. Everyone but me. I tried the police. That was the worst mistake of all. I went in with this frantic, rambling story about identity theft, doppelgangers, being stalked by myself. The officer behind the desk gave me the blank stare of a man used to hearing crazy people. I shoved my ID at him, begged him to look me up. He typed something into his computer, then frowned. "Sir, according to our system, you've already been here." "What?" "You filed a complaint 2 days ago about someone impersonating you. We're already investigating it." "No, I didn't." He cut me off with a sharp look. "Do you want to explain why there are 2 active complaints under your name, both accusing the other of being an imposter?" I couldn't speak. My throat closed up. They let me leave, but not before writing my name on some clipboard and giving me the kind of look reserved for unstable people who might cause trouble. By the end of that week, I wasn't just losing my life. I was losing proof I'd ever had it. Emails disappeared from my inbox. My social media accounts vanished. Friends said they'd been deleted. When I showed up at my parents' house in desperation, my mom hugged me at the door, but then froze, confused. "You just left. Why are you back?" She swore she'd seen me half an hour earlier, sitting in the kitchen, drinking coffee with my dad. I lost it. I screamed, cried, begged her to believe me. But when my dad came to the door, the look he gave me wasn't anger. It was pity. "Son, go home. Get some rest." I didn't even get to argue because my double walked out of the kitchen right then, holding my mom's mug like he'd lived there his whole life, and they let him stay. After that, I stopped trying to fight it. What was the point? Everywhere I went, he had already been there. Every person I turned to looked at me like I was the copy, the fraud, the intruder. I stopped showering, stopped shaving, stopped sleeping anywhere consistent. I crashed in all-night diners, empty parks, once even a bus station just to feel surrounded by strangers who didn't know my face. But no matter where I went, he was always one step ahead. The final straw came when I tried sneaking back into my apartment. I waited until 3 a.m., climbed the fire escape, pried open the window I thought he wouldn't check. For a second, it felt like victory, until I stepped inside and found him sitting on the couch in the dark. My couch, my living room, my face. He didn't lunge at me, didn't yell, he just smiled this slow, knowing smile. "I told you," he said. "You don't belong here." Then he stood, calm as ever, and moved toward me. I panicked, stumbled backward, nearly fell out the window. And the last thing I saw before I scrambled down the fire escape was him leaning against the frame, smirking like he'd already won. So here I am, typing this from a borrowed laptop in a library, my hands shaking, smelling like sweat and fear. I don't know what I am anymore. A mistake? A shadow? All I know is he's taken everything. My home, my job, my family, even my name. And I think the worst part, the part that makes my chest feel hollow, is that nobody even noticed the switch. Not really. It was seamless, like I was never supposed to exist in the first place. So if you've made it this far, thank you. Honestly, I don't even know why I'm still typing all this out, except that maybe it's the only thing I have left. If I don't document it, if I don't leave something behind, then maybe I really will vanish. Maybe I'll dissolve like smoke and no one will ever remember there was a me at all. And I need you to remember, even if no one else does. After the night my double smirked at me from my own window, I stopped pretending I could go home again. Home wasn't mine anymore. Work wasn't mine. Family wasn't mine. Nothing tied me down except the scraps I could carry. An old backpack with a couple of shirts, a notebook, a cheap prepaid phone I bought with the last of my cash. That's when I decided, if I couldn't fight him head on, I'd at least prove I existed. I started documenting everything. Every memory I could recall, I wrote down. Where I went to school, my first kiss, the scar on my knee from when I wiped out on my bike at 12, the way my mom used to pack PB and J in my lunchbox, cut diagonally because she said the triangle shape made it taste better. All of it, page after page, like I was building a case file on myself. I bought a cheap camcorder from a pawn shop and started recording my days. My face, my voice, timestamps on clocks in the background, newspapers folded in my hand. I uploaded clips to cloud storage under fake emails, hoping, praying, that if anyone ever questioned me, I'd have proof. But proof of what? That's the question that kept gnawing at me. Because the more I wrote, the more I noticed something strange. Some memories didn't line up. Take my childhood. I always thought I grew up in a small blue house with chipped white trim. But when I checked Google Maps, the house on my old street was yellow and had been yellow since at least the earliest street view photos. Or my high school diploma. I remember hanging it on the wall in my apartment. Except when I broke back in weeks ago, searching desperately for anything I could grab, it was gone. Not misplaced, just not there at all. And then there were the medical records. That's where everything cracked open. I don't know what made me do it, maybe desperation, maybe instinct. But one night I walked into the records office of the hospital where I was supposedly born. I figured they'd laugh in my face, but it was almost too easy. Nobody even stopped me when I pretended to be looking for genealogy stuff. When I asked for my birth certificate, they handed me one. My name, my date of birth, my parents' names, everything seemed normal until I noticed a tiny note in the margin. File amended. That word haunted me. Amended. So I dug deeper. The clerk probably thought I was just another family history nerd. She let me flip through microfilm archives, dusty records nobody had touched in decades. That's where I found it. Not under my name, under a case number. Experimental trial, subject designation, failed replication. I swear my blood went cold reading those words. Failed replication. The file was fragmented, whole chunks redacted, but the pieces that weren't made me sick. It described an initiative I'd never heard of. Some kind of biomedical project. The dates lined up with the year I was born. The subject description matched me down to the detail. Dark hair, birthmark on left shoulder blade. And in the notes section, one chilling line. Clone viability uncertain. Subject release into environment for long-term observation. That's when it hit me. What if I wasn't the real one? What if I'd never been real at all? I stumbled out of that hospital with my legs shaking so bad I almost fell down the steps. The world around me looked the same. Cars in traffic, people laughing into phones, the smell of fried food from a cart, but it all felt fake, like a movie set. Because if the file was true, then my entire life, school, friends, job, family had been built on a lie. I wasn't me, I was a test subject, a mistake. And that's when the calls started again. The prepaid phone buzzed in my pocket at 2 a.m., my own number flashing across the screen. Even though I hadn't given it to anyone, I answered, hand shaking. His voice, calm, steady. Stop digging. You weren't supposed to find that. You're the original, aren't you? I croaked. He chuckled, low and cruel. Of course I am. You were just a trial run, a copy that somehow slipped through. I'm taking back what's mine. Everything in me wanted to deny it, to scream that he was wrong, but deep down, the hospital records already told me what I didn't want to believe. I was the imposter. For days after that, I drifted through the city in a haze, watching people live their lives, families in restaurants, coworkers leaving office buildings together, kids playing tag on the sidewalk. And all I could think was, none of it was ever mine. I'd stolen a life that didn't belong to me. And now the original had come to collect. But here's the thing, he slipped up. It happened on another call a week later. Same number, same voice. Except this time, in the middle of mocking me, he said something that froze me. You remember when Dad took us fishing that summer, the way he yelled because you dropped the tackle box in the river? Except that never happened. Not to me. My dad hated fishing. We never went once. So how did he know a memory that wasn't mine? Or worse, how did he believe it was mine? That's when the doubt returned sharper than ever. If I wasn't the original, how could he get something so wrong? If he was the real one, why did his past look different from mine? What if neither of us was the original? What if we were both mistakes? Last night, it all came to a head. I was holed up in an abandoned building, the camcorder running, whispering into it like some lunatic, my name is redacted. I exist. I exist. I exist. And then the phone rang. Not my number this time. A new one. Unknown. I almost didn't answer, but something in me knew I had to. I lifted it to my ear, heart pounding, and I swear to you, what I heard was my own voice again. But not mine, not his. A third one. Calm, quiet, almost gentle. Both of you are mistakes, it whispered. I'm the real one. Click. The line went dead. I dropped the phone. My legs gave out. Because if that's true, if there's another me out there, then this whole nightmare isn't over. It's just beginning. And I don't know if I'll survive what comes next. Alright, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have so many more amazing stories coming your way, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to reach 100k subscribers by the end of this year, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.